I once thought luxury could compensate for freedom. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. If you believe that living in a 30-room mansion in Palo Alto, being chauffeured around in a limousine and dining under crystal chandeliers is heaven, then you need to hear my story. My name is Isabella Carter, the only daughter of Philip Carter, CEO of Carter Dynamics, one of the most powerful tech empires in America. But behind those gilded walls, my childhood was nothing short of a life sentence, with no chance for parole. My father didn't raise a child. He molded a product. From the time I could walk, every step, every word was monitored and adjusted carefully, as if I were a long-term investment worth millions of dollars. I learned to behave like a lady before I could even tie my own shoelaces. Diplomacy lessons, ballet classes, speech training, all scheduled by the time I was 4 years old. No screaming, no crying loudly, no showing weakness like ordinary children. Those ironclad rules were etched into every breath I took. At 13, while my friends eagerly attended summer camps and sleepovers, I was locked in a study room with a private tutor, drilling SAT practice tests from 7 in the morning until 9 at night. "Isabella," my father said, his voice cold and sharp as steel, "the heir to Carter Dynamics has no right to fail. You will get into Stanford. No Stanford, no daughter." I nodded, my hands clenched under the table until they turned white, hiding the panic rising in my chest. At 17, I met the expectation. Accepted into Stanford Business School with honors scholarship. But the only acknowledgement I received from my father was a stiff nod at the orientation ceremony, as if I had merely completed another checkbox on his life blueprint for me. By 24, I was officially promoted to Director of Strategic Development for the West Coast region. A title that sounded impressive but, in truth, made me just another pawn in his cold business empire. I worked 70 hours a week, signed countless million-dollar contracts, but no one ever asked if I was happy. No one cared if I cried myself to sleep every night. The final piece of my father's master plan for my life was laid out at a family dinner on my 25th birthday. He placed a white envelope before me, his gaze leaving no room for protest. "This is your engagement to Levi Montgomery," he said coolly, sipping expensive red wine. Levi Montgomery, heirs to Montgomery Holdings, a handsome young man from a prestigious family and, most importantly, a perfect pawn in Carter Dynamics' expansion ambition. I sat there, frozen, my hands icy cold, while my mother, the woman who had never once stood up for me, smiled with satisfaction as if she had just sealed a lucrative deal. "Everything is arranged," my father continued, his tone as mechanical as reading out a contract. "The wedding will take place at St. Patrick's Church next June. Afterward, the Carter and Montgomery families will officially merge. An unstoppable empire." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table draped in white silk, to hurl that damned envelope into the roaring fireplace nearby. But I just sat there, silent, like a porcelain doll expected to smile, expected to nod obediently. I need time to think," I mumbled, my voice weaker than the cold, expensive windows. "It, proves that..." My father narrowed his eyes, staring at me as if I had uttered the most idiotic thing he had ever heard. "Isabella, you don't need to think," he said icily. "You just need to do exactly what I tell you, don't disappoint me." The dinner ended in a suffocating, heavy silence. I stepped out onto the balcony, shrouded in cold mist, gazing down at the dazzling lights of Palo Alto below. The world was supposedly at my feet, but my heart felt utterly hollow. I wondered, if I truly plunged into this plan, living according to his script, would there come a day when I wouldn't even recognize the person in the mirror? In the distance, headlights streaked by, like blurred ribbons, and for the first time in my life, a terrifying but liberating thought crept into my mind. Maybe, to truly live, I had to be willing to lose everything. That Saturday morning, it poured rain like the sky was breaking open. I had just left another mind-numbing business meeting with the Carter Dynamics board of directors, my chest hollow and nauseous. My silver Mercedes-AMG sped along Highway 280, windshield wipers thumping uselessly against the suffocating storm. I just wanted to escape, at least for a moment. But even the car seemed to turn against me. About 10 miles outside Palo Alto, the engine sputtered and died. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, warning lights flashing crimson. Expensive car stalled in the middle of the highway, rain slashing down like whips. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, heart pounding so hard it hurt, feeling as if the entire universe was mocking my helplessness. With no other choice, I grabbed my coat and stumbled out into the downpour, hands trembling as I fumbled to call roadside assistance. Poor signal. One call failed, another failed. I stood there, soaked to the bone, teeth chattering, as cars hissed by without slowing down. After about 15 minutes, a distant truck horn cut through the rain. A battered blue tow truck pulled over to the shoulder. The door swung open, and out stepped a man in faded jeans and a blue work shirt smudged with oil. He wore a baseball cap, his wet hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes, God, his eyes, were warm, like sunlight breaking through a gray sky. "Having trouble with your car?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. I stammered out an explanation, pointing to the blinking dashboard. He frowned slightly, then slid into the driver's seat to check. "Fuel pump issue," he said, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Nothing too serious, but it needs to be towed." I nodded hesitantly. His simple, honest demeanor was worlds apart from the cold, polished men I had always known. Men in $1,000 suits with icy handshakes and fake smiles. When the car was towed to a small garage tucked away on the city's edge, I followed him like a lost shadow. The garage smelled of oil, metal, and something oddly comforting. "My name's James Walker," he said, offering his hand. "You can wait in the lounge. There's a coffee machine, though it's not Starbucks." I laughed for the first time in months. A small, awkward, but genuine laugh. The lounge had only an old couch, a scratched wooden table, and a noisy automatic coffee machine. James handed me a steaming paper cup and sat at a respectful distance, as if afraid to make me uncomfortable. "Never seen anyone show up at my garage in a Prada suit before," he joked, his eyes twinkling. I looked down at my soaked designer outfit and laughed again, louder this time, like a wave crashing through a broken dam. We talked about small things. California's erratic rains, roadside diners he loved, his dream to expand the garage into a vocational school for underprivileged kids. James never asked about my background. Never cared about the diamond ring on my finger or the Chanel bag clutched against my chest. He just saw me. Truly saw me. "Life's too short to live it just to please others," James said, sipping his now cold coffee, eyes distant. "I had offers from big corporations, but it wasn't for me. I'd rather do something real." My heart twisted painfully. Half my life had been spent living according to someone else's plan. I looked up at James, a strange feeling rising in my chest, both painful and liberating. As if someone had just cracked open a long-sealed window. After nearly 3 hours, the Mercedes roared back to life. James refused to take anything beyond the repair cost. "Just promise me you won't drive alone in the rain next time," he said, smiling. I left the garage with the invoice in hand, but part of my heart stayed behind. The entire drive home I couldn't stop thinking about him. About the way he hurriedly wiped his hands on his jeans before shaking mine. About the honesty in his eyes, free from calculation. About how, for once in my life, I met someone who didn't want me to be anyone else. The following week, I found every excuse possible to return to the garage. Morning lights? Tire pressure check? Routine oil change? I even learned how to distinguish between a normal engine noise and one that needed a garage visit. All just to see James again. We drank coffee together at a scratched wooden table, laughing under the dim lights of the small garage. I told him about my silly childhood habits, scribbling behind wardrobes, hiding cookies under pillows. He shared stories about working late nights to pay his mechanical engineering tuition. No pretending. No performances. Just two people, bare, real. One late afternoon, as the sky burnt crimson with sunset, James spoke softly. Isabella, I don't know where you come from or if you belong in my world, but if you'll allow me, I want to stay by your side. I looked at him, my heart pounding wildly. No talks of money, status or fame. Just the pure desire to be together. For once in my life, I didn't need to think. I nodded. And I knew, from that moment, my life would never be the same again. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep playing the perfect puppet. And so, on a dreary Sunday afternoon, I stepped into my father's study, the silent courtroom of the Carter household for generations. My father sat behind his gleaming walnut desk, sunlight pouring through the glass windows onto his immaculate Armani suit. His eyes were ice cold as he looked up at me, as if he had already predicted the foolishness I was about to utter. I took a deep breath, clutching the paper in my hand so tightly that my nails dug into my skin. Father. My voice trembled slightly, but held firm. I cannot marry Levi Montgomery. Silence. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a devastating storm. He slowly curled his fingers, tapping them against the polished surface of the desk. Explained. Just one word, sharp as a blade. I looked him straight in the eye, refusing to flinch. Because I loved someone else, I said, and when the name left my lips it felt like breaking the invisible chains that had bound me for years. I love James Walker. The air in the room thickened until it was almost impossible to breathe. My father's face flushed crimson, then turned a terrifying shade of purple, as if his blood vessels were about to burst. A damn mechanic, he roared, leaping to his feet, the chair screeching loudly. You intend to disgrace the Carter name, Isabella. I stood my ground. She's not just a mechanic, he's the only one who's ever truly seen me. Not as an investment in your portfolio. My father slammed his hand onto the desk, the sound echoing against the trophy-lined walls. Listen to me, Isabella, he hissed through gritted teeth. You will marry Levi as planned. If you refuse, forget your inheritance, your position at Carter Dynamics, and your place in the Carter family. I bit my lip so hard it almost bled. But my decision was made. Then, I renounce it, I whispered, lifting my chin, my voice no longer shaking. I choose love. I choose freedom. My father froze, disbelief etched across his face. Then he let out a hollow, cruel laugh that bounced off the marble floors. You'll regret this, he spat, each word like a nail hammered into a coffin. You'll come crawling back to me. I said nothing. I simply turned and walked away, leaving behind his furious roars and the shattering of a crystal glass against the wall. My mother, who had spent her life remaining silent in the face of injustice, stood halfway down the staircase, her eyes brimming with tears but her mouth refusing to open. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I would crumble. That night, I packed my belongings. One battered silver Samsonite suitcase, a few changes of clothes, some books, and a small framed photo of me and my mother, from happier, long-forgotten days. My credit cards were frozen the moment I stepped out of the Carter estate. My bank accounts locked. My phone line. Everything in my world, status, wealth, reputation, suffocated with a mere nod from my father. James picked me up at a gas station on the outskirts of the city in his beat-up pickup truck. When I climbed into the cab, soaked to the skin from a sudden downpour, he simply handed me a dry towel, without a single word of pity or judgment. Are you sure? James asked, his voice low and rough. I nodded, rain and tears indistinguishable on my cheeks. More sure than anything else in my life. We drove through the dark streets, past flickering neon signs, wrapped in silence. Finally, the truck pulled up outside an old apartment building on the outskirts of Palo Alto. James's apartment was barely 500 square feet, with a leaking ceiling and warped wooden floors. The old iron bed creaked with every movement. The living room had only a worn-out armchair and a makeshift coffee table crafted from a shipping crate. But there, for the first time, I found something the Carter mansion never gave me. Peace. James spread a thick blanket on the floor for me. Not fancy, he smiled, his brown eyes twinkling under the dim yellow light. But it's home. I sat beside him, clutching a cup of hot cocoa he had made using an old kettle. The sweet scent of cocoa filled the chilly air, warming me deep to my core. "Are we going to be okay?" I whispered, the words almost dissolving into the quiet night. James pulled me into his arms, his warm hand wrapping around me like an unspoken vow. "No amount of gold or silver can buy what we have, Isabella," he whispered. "Just trust me. Trust in us." And under that leaking roof, with the rain softly falling outside, I realized I had lost the entire world. But in return, I had found myself. I thought the nightmare ended when I left the Carter estate. But I had underestimated the vicious stubbornness of my family. They wouldn't leave me alone. They wouldn't allow me to disappear from the world they had painstakingly crafted. Just 3 days after I moved into the small apartment with James, the storm began. The old phone James had given me for emergencies rang non-stop, numbers flashing relentlessly. When I didn't pick up, the messages poured in. From my mother, from the family attorney, even from my father's personal assistant. "Isabella, you must come home immediately. This is an order. Isabella, your father has been hospitalized with a heart attack. If you have any conscience left. Isabella, we can negotiate, come back, we'll discuss everything." I read those words, my hands trembling. Not from emotion, but from fury. Even when trying to lure me back, they used the same dirty tactics: guilt, threats, and bribery. That evening, when James returned home from a long shift, I showed him the messages. He said nothing, just squeezed my hand, his gaze pouring silent strength into me like no spoken comfort ever could. The next morning, we woke up to heavy pounding on the door. When James opened it, there stood my mother. Victoria Carter. In an expensive cashmere dress. Standing awkwardly in the narrow run-down hallway. She clutched her handbag tightly, her carefully made-up face twisted in a mixture of anger and worry. "Isabella," she said, her voice sweet like honey but her eyes burning, "are you really planning to live like this? In this filthy hole, with a mechanic?" I clenched my fists to stop myself from bursting into tears out of humiliation. James stepped in front of me, polite but firm. "Mrs. Carter, if you're here to insult us, please leave." My mother shot him a dagger-like glare, then turned back to me, forcing a stiff smile. "My dear," she softened her tone. "Come home. Your father has arranged everything. A new penthouse in downtown. A brand new Bentley. An unlimited credit card. And Levi is still willing to forgive you." Every word stabbed into my chest like needles. I let out a cold, slow laugh. "What you just described, Mother, isn't love. It's a gilded cage." My mother's face went pale. She hissed through gritted teeth. "You'll regret this, when he leaves you, when you're starving on the streets." James tightened his grip on my hand, anchoring me through the storm. I stared straight into my mother's eyes, steady for the first time in my life. "I'd rather starve than live a life where even my soul doesn't belong to me." She spun on her heels, her stiletto slamming so hard on the cracked wooden floor that it echoed loudly. When the door slammed shut behind her, the apartment fell into deep silence. James pulled me into his arms, his hand gently stroking my hair. "You're very brave," he whispered. But I knew. The storm was far from over. 2 days later, when I arrived at the small office where I worked as a freelance business consultant, I was stopped at the door. "I'm sorry, Isabella," the manager said, avoiding my eyes. "We have to terminate your contract. Some major clients applied heavy pressure. We can't afford the risk." I stood frozen. I didn't need to ask who was behind it. That evening, I found a large envelope shoved through our door. Inside was a contract: return to the Carter house, cut ties with James, regain all my assets, and receive a $6 million bonus. A scribbled note in red ink beneath it. Last chance. Held the contract, a mix of sorrow and contempt surging in my chest. When James came home, I burned the entire stack of papers in the old fireplace. The flames roared, consuming not just the papers but an entire rotten past I had chosen to leave behind. James said nothing. He just sat beside me, watching the flames dance until they collapsed into ash. That night, we curled up together on the rickety old armchair, without grand promises, without extravagant dreams. There was only one truth that echoed in my heart. I had made my choice. I had lost everything. And I had no regret. Our wedding took place on a crisp Sunday morning in late autumn, with golden leaves blanketing the paths around Willow Creek Park. No designer gown. No grand cathedral. No symphony orchestra or endless streams of white silk, like the weddings my parents once forced upon me. Just me, James, a few close friends, and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The wedding dress I wore was a simple white one grabbed from a clearance rack. No crystals, no lace. James wore a rented suit, his seamule tie slightly crooked from tying it himself. And despite everything being humble to the point of clumsiness, I had never felt more beautiful. As the music played, I linked arms with a close friend, the one who stood in for the father who refused to walk me down the aisle. My heart pounded so hard it threatened to burst from my chest. James stood waiting under a canopy of wildflowers, his gaze shining so brightly that nothing, not a fortune in dollars, not a fleet of supercars, not a mansion, could ever compare. But at that very moment, amid the breeze and the soft laughter, I saw them. Vi's parents, Philip Carter and Victoria Carter. They stood apart from the crowd, outside the flower-strewn lawn, their faces cold and rigid as statues. My mother wore a dark Chanel dress, her lips blood red. My father wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his sharp eyes piercing the distance. My heart clenched. James noticed. He squeezed my hand lightly, his eyes silently asking, "What do you want to do?" I took a deep breath. I knew this was the moment of reckoning. The ceremony began. We exchanged simple vows. I choose you through richness or poverty, through health or sickness. No promises of being a great boss, no promises of grand castles. Just a promise to stay together, no matter what. Applause erupted as we shared our first kiss as husband and wife. I turned my head toward my parents. They were still standing there, motionless, like two ghosts from the past. When the simple wedding reception began, just a few wooden tables, cold beers, and dishes lovingly prepared by friends, my parents marched straight toward us, their eyes sharp like twin blades. "Isabella," my mother spoke first, her strained smile on the verge of shattering. "You can stop this madness. The marriage can be annulled. Levi is still willing to forgive you. You only have to say the word." I gripped James's hand, feeling the peace of his warmth, like a torch in the middle of a storm. My father wasted no time. "This is your last chance, leave that mechanic. Come home. Or do you intend to spend the rest of your life in poverty and shame?" All eyes in the park turned toward us. I could feel the collective breath-holding of our friends, the ones who had witnessed my struggles over these many months. I released James's hand and stepped forward. My voice rang out, clear, unwavering. "I have spent half my life trying to please my parents, seeking approval, longing for love." I stared straight at my father, then my mother, their eyes as frozen as a winter lake. "But today, I choose myself." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop her. "James loves me not because I'm Isabella Carter. He loves me simply because I am me." I choked up, but forced myself to continue. "And if today's choice is between a life of pretense and a love that's real, then I'm sorry. I don't need wealth, power, or fame." I turned toward James, my eyes full of emotion. I need him. A quiet explosion erupted in my heart. A blast of pure liberation. My father's face turned ashen, his lips trembling with fury. "You'll be erased from the Carter family tree," he roared. "You won't see a single cent of inheritance." I smiled softly. A name doesn't define a person's worth. A check can't buy freedom. My mother stood paralyzed. Then she grabbed my father's hand, stammering, "Let's go, Philip. There's nothing left to say." I watched them turn and walk away, their silhouettes crumbling under the amber light of the autumn afternoon, disappearing behind the fiery trees. James moved beside me, pulling me into a fierce embrace, as our friends erupted into heartfelt applause. Not for wealth, not for fame, but for love and courage. I lifted my head, gazing up at the flawless blue sky. That day, I lost everything. Family, fortune, and part of my past. But at that same moment, I knew I had gained something far more precious. Freedom. Life after our wedding was filled with simple days, overflowing with laughter. That rickety little apartment with its peeling walls and creaky wooden floors was the first true home I ever had. James continued working at the old garage, while I picked up more consulting projects for small businesses in the area. Everything was peaceful, until the day everything changed. It was a Friday afternoon when I finished work earlier than usual. I stopped by our favorite Thai place to pick up some pad Thai, James's absolute favorite, as a little surprise. But when I got home, the living room was empty, and a hastily scribbled note lay on the table. "Running an errand, back late. Love you. My heart clenched. James was never vague like that. In recent weeks, he had also been disappearing at odd hours and his phone rang incessantly, though he always rushed to decline the calls. A growing sense of unease churned in my chest. Unable to resist, I decided to bring dinner to the garage like usual. But when I arrived, I froze. The garage was closed. The lights were off. James's old pickup truck was nowhere in sight. I called his phone. 3 times, 4 times. Every time, the same cold message. "The subscriber is not available." Just as panic started to tighten its grip on me, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Walker, please come to 4500 Crescent Bull immediately. This concerns your husband." My hands shook as I punched the address into my GPS. It led to the tech district north of San Jose, where billion-dollar corporations reigned. Heart pounding, I sped through the streets, horrific scenarios flashing through my mind. An accident? A hospital? Or worse? But when I arrived, I couldn't believe my eyes. Before me stood a gleaming skyscraper, its glass facade shimmering under the setting sun, with bold letters etched across the front. "Walker into his office." A polite security guard escorted me to the top floor via a private elevator. Every step felt heavier than the last. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into an expansive office surrounded by glass walls, a soaring ceiling, and polished walnut conference tables. A man in a flawless gray suit stood with his back to me, gazing out over the city awash in golden light. "James?" I called out, my voice raw. The man turned around. And I barely recognized my husband. Gone were the faded jeans, the oil-stained t-shirts. In their place stood James, in a sharply tailored suit, hair neatly styled, carrying the aura of a world-class CEO. He smiled and walked toward me. "Hello, Isabella," he said, his voice deep and warm, though tinged with nervousness. "I think it's time I told you the truth." I stood, frozen. Before I could respond, the office door burst open again. And just like a recurring nightmare, my parents stormed in. My father, Philip Carter, stood pale, fists clenched tight. My mother, Victoria, clung to her expensive handbag as if it were her last lifeline. "What the hell is going on here?" my father roared, marching straight toward James. "Why is my daughter standing in the office of a damn mechanic?" James smirked slightly. Apologies, Mr. Carter, he said, his voice polite but sharp as a blade. I forgot to introduce myself. I am James Walker, founder and CEO of Walker Innovations, the leading company in next-generation electric battery technology. A long silence stretched for nearly a full minute. My mother staggered, grabbing the edge of the table for support. My father's face turned crimson, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. No. Impossible, he stammered. You're just a mechanic. I had you investigated. James chuckled softly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. That's right, he nodded. At first, I owned a chain of small garages, built from a college loan. But 5 years ago, I founded Walker Innovations. Today, our company is valued at $118 billion. I stood there, mouth agape, unable to speak. James turned to me, his eyes gentle. I didn't tell you from the beginning, he whispered, because I needed to be sure you loved me. For me. Not for any number. Tears welled in my eyes. James had chosen to live as an ordinary man, leaving behind glory to test my heart. And now, with the truth laid bare, I loved him more than ever. My father, like a drowning man clutching a rotting plank, spoke up. Walker Innovations, we could collaborate. Our families could become strategic partners. James smiled, but it was colder than the Alaskan ice. Sorry, he replied. My family now consists only of Isabella, and we don't need you. I tightened my grip on James's hand. We walked out of the office, leaving my parents behind, small, bewildered, powerless, in a world they once thought they controlled. That day, I didn't just find the truth. I found justice. And once again, I chose love. Not for the glamour, but for the pure soul standing beside me, defying all the false glory. We had barely stepped out of the lobby of Walker Innovations, still catching our breath, when my phone began vibrating relentlessly. Messages. Missed calls, over and over. The senders. Mother, father, father's personal assistant. Only a few hours earlier, they had coldly cast me out of their lives like defective merchandise. Now, or rather the daughter who married a billionaire, suddenly became an irreplaceable gem in their new master plan. I ignored them all, squeezing James's hand tighter, feeling the silent, unwavering strength he poured into me. We headed home, to a small house we had just rented near Palo Alto, not grand, not showy, but filled with laughter and peace. That night, while we were eating pizza on the floor, the doorbell rang. I hesitated. James gave a small nod, signaling